Welcome back to World Tour. Today, we're diving into a list of 30 countries where law and order are scarce, electricity is unreliable, and modern conveniences like hospitals and schools are practically non-existent. In these places, people live a unique lifestyle, one where the usual rules simply don't apply. From isolated mountain villages to sprawling deserts, let's explore some of the world's most unconventional communities. 1. Somalia. Decades of civil war and conflict have left Somalia without a stable government structure. While some areas are managed by local authorities, the lack of centralized governance has led to regions operating independently. Essential services like electricity, hospitals, and education are often scarce, with communities relying heavily on local networks and self-made solutions for survival. 2. Yemen. Yemen has endured years of conflict, which has devastated its infrastructure. Many parts of the country lack reliable access to electricity and safe drinking water, and healthcare services are critically under-resourced. Schools are often out of reach for many children, and communities have had to adapt, depending on traditional methods to meet their needs. 3. Democratic Republic of the Congo. The Congo's vast jungles and difficult terrain make it challenging for the government to establish a strong presence. In many rural areas, infrastructure like roads, electricity, and hospitals are nearly non-existent. Locals rely on natural resources and traditional medicine, while community elders play a crucial role in maintaining order. 4. South Sudan. As one of the world's youngest countries, South Sudan has faced continuous internal conflict, making it difficult to establish governance. Many rural regions have no access to power, clean water, or basic healthcare. People often rely on makeshift schools or learning from elders, while local leaders play a critical role in guiding the community. 5. Venezuela. Once one of South America's wealthiest nations, Venezuela has seen a collapse in public services due to economic hardship. Frequent blackouts and shortages of essentials make everyday life challenging, especially in rural areas. People have had to find creative ways to survive, often forming community groups to share resources and assist one another. 6. Afghanistan. Afghanistan's mountainous terrain and prolonged instability have left many regions without central governance. Villages in remote areas operate independently, following tribal traditions that are centuries old. Schools and hospitals are sparse, with families often relying on community knowledge and resources for survival. 7. Haiti. Despite its vibrant culture, Haiti has long struggled with poverty and natural disasters that have weakened its infrastructure. Power outages and water scarcity are common, and healthcare facilities are often under-resourced. Many Haitians rely on local remedies and community support to meet their needs. 8. Central African Republic. Years of unrest in the Central African Republic have left parts of the country effectively without a government presence. In these areas, people live without reliable electricity or healthcare. Survival here often means relying on one another and learning skills to adapt to a life with limited resources. 9. Chad. In Chad, especially in remote regions, people live with little to no infrastructure. Electricity is a luxury, and hospitals and schools are few and far between. The community relies heavily on traditional practices, and elders are often looked to for guidance and wisdom. 10. Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is home to hundreds of indigenous tribes, many of whom live without modern conveniences. In these isolated regions, electricity, schools, and hospitals are rare, and the government's influence is minimal. Tribes manage their affairs according to ancient customs, making survival a communal effort. 1. Zimbabwe. Due to economic and political challenges, Zimbabwe's rural areas experience limited access to essential services. People face daily struggles with food and power shortages, relying on local farming and bartering to meet their needs. Schools and healthcare facilities are limited, forcing many to adapt creatively to their environment. 12. Syria. The conflict in Syria has severely damaged the country's infrastructure, leaving entire towns and villages without power, clean water, or medical facilities. Many communities have had to establish informal support networks, relying on each other for medical aid and schooling. 13. Myanmar. In Myanmar, ethnic groups in rural regions live under their own governance with little involvement from the central government. Without electricity, hospitals, or formal education, these communities are self-sustained, relying on knowledge passed down through generations. 14. North Korea. Rural areas. In North Korea's rural areas, modern amenities are virtually non-existent. Outside of government oversight, communities live in isolation, relying on agriculture and traditional practices. Access to electricity, schools, and healthcare is minimal, and survival is centered around self-reliance. 15. Libya. Libya's ongoing political divide has left parts of the country governed by militias or local groups rather than a central authority. In these areas, hospitals and schools are rare, and people often rely on community networks to provide essential needs. 16. Lebanon. Lebanon faces significant political and economic instability, particularly in rural regions. Frequent power outages and water shortages are part of daily life, and healthcare access is limited. Community efforts play a large role in providing services that the government cannot. 17. Mauritania. In Mauritania, many remote areas are governed by traditional tribal laws rather than a centralized government. Electricity, schools, and hospitals are limited, and people live by customs and practices that have been passed down for generations. 18. Nepal. Remote regions. Although Nepal has a government, its remote mountainous areas operate with minimal state influence. Many villages have no electricity, schools, or hospitals, relying on community traditions and agricultural practices to survive. 19. Burundi. Burundi is a small country where poverty has hindered the development of infrastructure. Electricity, healthcare, and schools are limited, and communities have developed strong self-support systems to make up for the lack of services. 20. Eritrea. Isolated from much of the world, Eritrea's rural areas often lack modern conveniences. With limited access to power, schools, and medical services, people rely heavily on local customs and self-sufficiency to meet daily needs. 21. Niger. In Niger, nomadic communities live without modern infrastructure, moving with the seasons and relying on traditional survival methods. With minimal healthcare and education facilities, these communities have created their own systems of support. 22. Western Sahara. The Western Sahara is a disputed territory with little formal governance. Many nomadic groups live without access to schools or hospitals, navigating the harsh desert landscape with knowledge passed down through generations. 23. Mali. In Mali's rural areas, poverty and conflict have limited government presence. Many communities live without reliable power, schools, or hospitals, relying on traditions to navigate the challenges of daily life. 24. Sudan. Conflict in Sudan has left large parts of the country with minimal government services. In these areas, communities work together to provide education and healthcare, living in a system where self-reliance is key. 25. Togo. In Togo's isolated regions, essential services are limited, with minimal government oversight. Many locals rely on traditional practices, and community leaders guide daily life. 26. Madagascar. Outside its major cities, Madagascar's rural areas have limited infrastructure. People live without consistent access to electricity or modern healthcare, often relying on agriculture and communal knowledge. 27. Laos has many remote areas where traditional practices still dominate. Without regular access to electricity, hospitals, or formal education, people live close to nature and adhere to long-standing customs. 28. Western Papua, Indonesia. Many indigenous communities in Western Papua live without modern conveniences. In the dense jungles, electricity and schools are rare, and traditions guide every aspect of life. 29. Ethiopia, rural regions. Ethiopia's rural areas often operate independently from government influence. Villages may lack electricity, healthcare, and schools, with people relying on agriculture and local traditions. 30. Angola's countryside is marked by a lack of infrastructure, with many areas left without basic services. Villages have their own systems of governance and depend on natural resources and traditional practices for survival. Thank you for joining us on this eye-opening journey through some of the world's most unconventional and rugged places. From the heart of Africa to the remote reaches of Asia, these communities remind us of the strength and resilience of the human spirit. If you're curious about more such incredible places, hit that subscribe button, and keep exploring.